Okay, all right. So today we're gonna begin the next unit, which is Unit 5, which is ratios and proportion. Okay, and this is lesson 1. Now, the first lesson in class was on ratios, just definitions and some examples. So today we're gonna dive a little deeper into doing actual ratio and proportion questions. Now, I realized this. The last time I did this not on the board, meaning at my desk, this audio sounded considerably better, like way better. So from now on, I'm gonna try to do this without writing it on the smartboard and doing it at my desk instead. However, that means for the time being, you're gonna have to put up with all the clicking sound that I make with the keyboard, okay? I think what I'm gonna have to do eventually is to buy one of those writing pads that I could write on the pad, and then it will transfer to the computer. Okay, so that's probably the best thing, but I gotta look for one, and then gotta make sure I pick the right one. Okay, all right, so let's dive in. So Unit 5, Lesson 1, ratio and proportion. Now, what is it? The difference between ratio and proportion is minute, not minute. Minute, which means small. Okay, it's small but significant nonetheless. So what's a ratio again? Right, so a ratio is just a fraction, right? So ratio is a fraction, meaning one number over another. So these are the three ways you could represent a ratio. You could do 1 over 2. You could do 1 and then like this, 1 to 2. And then lastly, you could write 1 literally in English, 1 to 2. That's a ratio. So that brings us to this. What's a proportion then? A proportion is when you have two ratios that are equal. All right, did you get that? So while a ratio is just a fraction, a proportion means two ratios that are equal, meaning two fractions that are equal. So for example, right here, right, these two are equivalent fractions. So these two, so listen very carefully to the way I'm saying this, okay, because it matters. So you see how 1 over 2 is equivalent to 2 over 4, right? The equivalent fractions. So that means that these two ratios, the first ratio being 1/2, the other ratio being 2/4, these two ratios are in proportion. In proportion. Okay, that's the language of the topic here. Now, having said that, one of the first things I want to show you today is if I were to give you two ratios, can you tell if they're in proportion? Which means, are they actually equivalent fractions? That's another way of looking at it. And this is how you can tell. Two ratios are in proportion if you cross multiply the numerator with the denominator of the other fraction, and likewise the denominator of one fraction and the numerator of the other fraction, meaning multiply them like this. If they're equal, then they're in proportion. So let me show you what I mean. 1 times 4, that's 4. 2 times 2, that's 4. Is 4 equal to 4? Yes. So are they in proportion? Yes. The two ratios are in proportion. In other words, the two ratios are equal. Or in other words, the two fractions are equal. So you see how these words are used fairly interchangeably? Okay, so that's something that I need you to be able to do, to be able to use these words interchangeably and know that they mean the same thing. Okay, having said that, let's try the first example. Are these two ratios in proportion? So in other words, is 2 times 9. All right, you probably can't see this. The same thing as 3 times 6. So what's 2 times 9? 18. What's 3 times 6? 18. Now, this is how you would write it. You would say, yes, two ratios. So I'm gonna shorten this, okay? The ratios are in proportion. That's what you would write. Yes, the ratios are in proportion. Okay, let's try another one. Number 2. What about these two? What do you think? Let's try again. Okay, so now I could make it, I don't have to use the ovals. I could go like this. 20 times 5 is what? 100. 4 times 25. It's 100. Yep, so yes. Therefore, these two ratios are in proportion. Let's try another one. Now, actually, a bit of a switch. So now that we know that, the question is, okay, what happens if I'm missing a number? So what I'm trying to say is, what happens if I were to tell you that these two ratios are already in proportion, which means I'm like coming out and saying that, right? 5 over 8 is equal to something over 24. These two ratios are in proportion. The question then is, what's the missing number here at x? How would you find out? And to find out, you would do something like this. You would do 5 times 24 first, right? Because you got the two numbers, so what's 5 times 24? Let's do it. 5, 4 is 20. 5, 2 is 10, so 120. Now, here's something that I need you to know for now that we're going to cover again later. So what's 8 times x? Now, 8 times x is just 8x, which means 8 times x. And that equals 220. So my question now is, 8 times what gives you 120? How would you find out? 8 times what gives you 120? What would you do? Since this is multiply, right? 8 times what? Yeah, you divide. You would divide 8. So 8 over 8 is 1, so I'm just left with x, all right? And then 120 divided by 8, what do you think that is? What's 120 divided by 8? Right, 15. So this number, for these two ratios to be in proportion, x needs to be 15. Okay, and you can check, by the way. If you cross multiply 5 times 24, that's 120. If you do 8 times 15, that's also 120. Okay, so there's a way to check. Now, this last one, let's do one last one together. Here we got 6 times 25. Now what's 6 times 25? Yep, 150. And 15 times n is 15n. That equals to 150. Right? Because they're just equal. They're supposed to be equal. Now, question. 15 times what gives you 150? Yeah, right? You could divide. I know some of you know the answer already. Yep, it's 10. Okay, so 15 times 10 is 150. In other words, 150 divided by 15 is 10. Okay, so the letter n represents the number 10. Okay, so this is the opportunity for you to try a few questions on your own. So try these 3, okay, and then we'll go over it. So you can press pause. Okay, and we're back. So now, I really should write this down. Like, are these two ratios in proportion? Okay, so let me write this down right now. These ratios in proportion. Okay, I should do a better job of that. Okay, all right. So let's see. What did I say earlier? Right, you multiply, cross multiply, right? If they're equal, then you're good. So 5 times 8 is 40. 9 times 6, 54. So what do you say to that? Is 54 equal to 40? Nope. So therefore, no. The ratios are not in proportion. Okay? The ratios are not in proportion. Okay. Now, you have to find the letter x. So what do? 2 times 9, that's 18. 3 times x. It's 3x. So, in other words, 3 times what gives you 18? What do you think? Right, divide, right? 18 divided by 3, 6. Okay, one last one. Multiply, so you have to find x. 4 times 15 is, what is that? Right, 60. So 6 times x is 6x. So 6 times what gives you 60? That's right, 10. Okay, so that's it. So not a crazy lesson, all right? Again, if you don't understand any part of this, you can feel free to find me in the morning, all right? Okay, all right. Thanks for watching, and that's a wrap.
OMG, that was so good.